This course is the Introduction to Plans and Counterplan courses, intended for debaters who may not have much familiarity with these concepts. We are going to go through what these are and what some of the applications are to debate. To begin though, this first lesson is going to focus on AF and Neg burdens. This will help lay the groundwork for you to understand what the role of a plan is, what the role of a counterplan is, and how then you can use that to understand the broader concepts and their applications to debate. So, for starters, let's introduce some of these concepts. Both sides in a debate, the AF and the Neg, have different responsibilities. These responsibilities can be understood to be as burdens. So a burden or responsibility is a thing that you have to do to win the round. So the AF burden is to prove the desirability of the resolution. For the AF to win, the necessary and sufficient condition is that they have to prove the resolution is desirable. So to win, they have to do it, and if they do this, it is enough to win. So it is both necessary for them to win and sufficient. They must prove the resolution to be a desirable idea. So for example, if I were to say, resolved books are interesting, the AF, if they prove books are interesting, that is enough to win the round. That is necessary for them to win. They have to prove that, and it's sufficient. It is enough by itself. The Neg burden is to negate what the AF has presented. So this might sound very similar to the AF burden, but it actually differs in a key way. Namely, the negative does not have their own positive obligation to prove something. They don't have to prove necessarily the opposite of that resolution. They just have to disprove the affirmative. So they have to negate what the AF has presented. That is the burden of the negative. So this is true across events, whether you're doing Lincoln Douglas, public forum, or policy. The resolution is always a value statement. What I mean by value statement is that the resolution is saying if something is right or wrong. So if we were to say targeted killing is immoral for our resolution, that is a value statement. It is posing a question about whether or not that targeted killing is allowed or not. So here, we're going to do a quick vocabulary check. Before we begin, let's review some of these key vocabulary words that we will be using often throughout this course. Remember, it's natural to initially feel overwhelmed by all of the specialized language debaters use. If you encounter any language we use in this course, don't hesitate to leave a discussion question asking us what the term means. Learning the language of debate is a critical part for advancing your skills. For this course, the words we use most often will have debate-specific meanings. Here are what some of those words are. The first is the burden, something that a side has to prove to win the round. That is the responsibility or the requirement that someone has. Second, the advocacy, what a debater will defend. This is the central position they propose, or what they are saying should be adopted, basically the position that they are defending. So let's talk more specifically about the AF burden. The AF burden is to prove the desirability of the resolution. They have to prove the resolution is a good idea, which is fairly straightforward. They are assigned the side that supports the resolution. They have to defend that action taken in the resolution is a good thing. So, as part of this, there are really two central tenets of this. The first, presentation of an advocacy, or position you defend. So remember, the advocacy is the world that you defend happening. So, if the topic is that targeted killing is immoral, the AF advocacy is there will not be any more targeted killing. Second is support for that advocacy, often known as contentions or advantages. These are the things that support the central argument that you are making. So if you think of the advocacy as a table, you think of the support for it, or the contentions, as the legs. They prop up that table and keep it sturdy. So, similarly, your advocacy will be supported by your contentions or your advantages. So let's use an example to help illustrate some of these concepts. So resolved, we should go to a restaurant for dinner instead of eating at home. The advocacy, let's go to that restaurant. We are advocating this resolution. We are AF. First, the food is better at a restaurant than with home-cooked food, and second, it's more convenient. Those are the contentions, or the advantages, that are reasons to support that advocacy. So neg burden. Let's talk about what the neg's responsibility is, and how that might differ from what the AF's responsibility might be. The negative has to disprove the AF. That is the fundamental burden that the negative has to do. They do not need to necessarily prove something else is more desirable. They just need to prove the affirmative is not a good idea. So this is often known as negation theory. Negation theory meaning the set of conditions that are sufficient for the negative to win the debate, what the negative needs to do to win. So negation theory holds that the neg does not have a positive burden of proof. They just merely need to show that the affirmative is undesirable. However, the negative can go beyond that. They don't just need to show problems with the affirmative, they can present their own alternative advocacies and establish a trade-off between the affirmative advocacy and the negative advocacy. This is known as a counterplan, which we will discuss in future lessons. So let's look at an example here. Same resolution. Resolved, we should go to a restaurant for dinner instead of eating at home. So the neg arguments. They are presenting a disadvantage and an alternative advocacy, known as a counterplan. The first is the disadvantage. This is the reason why the affirmative advocacy is a bad idea and why it shouldn't be adopted. Disadvantage, it's expensive to go to a restaurant for dinner. It results in us wasting money. Second, the alternative. Instead, we should pick up groceries. See how these interact in different ways. The disadvantage approaches the affirmative advocacy on its own terms. It says, you think this is a good idea, we disagree. We think that's a bad idea. Very straightforward. The alternative advocacy is a bit more confusing. It's not necessarily saying that the affirmative advocacy by itself is a bad idea, but it's establishing an opportunity cost, or something else that the affirmative forgoes. There is something we should do instead of the affirmative, which renders the affirmative not a good idea, because even if in a vacuum it is okay, it prevents us doing something else that is more important. So, to summarize this lesson, both sides have discrete burdens, or separate things they need to do to win the round. These are necessary and sufficient for a victory. So, you need to do it, and if you do it, that is enough for you to win, meeting your burden. So the negative has to disprove the affirmative, and the affirmative has to prove a desirable option. Thank you for watching.